Welcome to this explainer. I want you to start by just taking a slow, deep breath with me. We are going to let go of a very specific, deeply ingrained illusion today. We literally all grew up with this idea, right? Let's just call it the income illusion. It's this pervasive belief that society is basically just a simple vertical ladder, and your rung on that ladder is determined almost entirely by the number at the bottom of your pay stub. We automatically assume that if two people make the exact same amount of money, well, they must occupy the exact same tier in the social hierarchy. But if we actually look closely at the world around us, if we really pay attention, we know, instinctively, that this just isn't true at all.
I mean, really think about it. Why do two people with the exact same high income often seem to live in completely different realities? Let's imagine a highly successful commercial entrepreneur, say someone who owns a booming chain of regional auto dealerships, and then put them next to a highly successful tenured university professor who curates for a major national gallery. Now, on paper, their tax brackets might be absolutely identical, but if you put them in a room together, they often seem to exist in completely separate, almost antagonistic worlds. Their tastes, their posture, their way of speaking, what they value, what they find totally vulgar, like picture a massive gold-plated watch versus a frayed, elbow-patched vintage tweed jacket, it all just clashes. If money is the only metric of social class, this underlying antagonism makes absolutely no sense.
Okay, so let's dive into this paradigm shift. The actual reason for this clash is that wealth, true, functional social power, is not just money. To really understand this, we're going to look at the groundbreaking framework of Pierre Bourdieu. And listen, I don't want you to think of Bourdieu as just some dusty 20th century sociologist. Actually, scratch that. Think of him as a master mapmaker of hidden social power. He looked past the obvious, and he mapped out the invisible forces that dictate human behavior. He drew a map that explains precisely why we feel incredibly out of place in certain rooms and totally effortlessly dominant in others.
Bourdieu argued that we absolutely do not live on a vertical ladder. Instead, we live in what he called a social space. And this is a complex strategic grid. It's an objective matrix of relations. Where you sit in this space completely dictates who you interact with, what kind of art you find beautiful, how you decorate your living room, and, crucially, how much hidden social power you wield. It is essentially a battlefield of constant quiet struggle. And to actually find your true coordinates on this battlefield, you have to look at three very specific dimensions.
That's right, 3 dimensions. Your actual rank in society, the literal way you move through the world, is dictated by 3 distinct and, frankly, often unspoken dimensions. We really need to take our time and unpack these slowly, because I promise you, once you see them, you will literally never look at a cocktail party, a boardroom, or even your own life the exact same way again.
Let's start with dimension 1. This is the volume of capital. Think of this as simply the raw power you bring to the table, the total absolute sum of all your resources. But notice, it's a lot more than just your bank account. It includes your economic capital, sure, your money, property, financial assets, but it also includes your cultural capital. This is your knowledge, your educational pedigree, your fluency and refined tastes. And finally, your social capital. Those elite networks, those powerful connections, you know, exactly who you can call when you're in a bind. The total volume of these 3 combined is the sheer size of your footprint in the social space. But volume alone doesn't even come close to telling the whole story.
Which brings us to the second dimension, the structure of capital. This is where Bourdieu's map becomes incredibly precise, almost surgical. Your structure of capital is the ratio between your different assets. Specifically, it's the ratio between your economic capital, the money, and your cultural capital, the knowledge and taste. You can have a massive, overwhelming volume of capital, but if it's, say, 90% money and 10% cultural fluency, your everyday life will look entirely different than someone whose capital is 90% cultural fluency and 10% money.
And this brings us perfectly back to our earlier mystery. Let's set up that real-world contrast again between 2 highly successful members of the dominant class. We have our commercial entrepreneur on one side and our university professor on the other. For the sake of the argument, let's assume they possess the exact same overall volume of capital. They are both powerful, they are both sitting at the very top of the social space, but they sit on absolute opposite ends of the structure of that capital.
Just look at this structural mismatch. It's fascinating. The professor is incredibly heavy on cultural capital, but relatively light on pure economic capital. The entrepreneur is the exact opposite. Because they draw their power and their status from completely different sources, they are basically forced to constantly defend the absolute value of their specific type of capital. It's a quiet rivalry.
Let's look at how this structural mismatch actually plays out in real everyday life. Those who are rich in economic capital, they tend to lean heavily into an aesthetic of hedonism, ease, and facility. Their social posture is one of confident discretion. They don't need to overthink things because their wealth simply smooths out the friction of the world. On the other hand, the intellectuals, the culture-rich group, they value asceticism, heavy reflection, and a deliberate, almost aggressive denial of the commercial world. Their social posture is one of disinterestedness. They signal their elite status precisely by showing that they don't care about mere money. They care about higher, more refined things. So what we have here are two opposing variants of the dominant class, locked in this incredibly subtle, lifelong aesthetic war.
But how does this abstract structure actually turn into your daily habits? Well, Bourdieu called this your habitus. Think of your habitus as a deeply internalized social operating system that gets downloaded into your brain by your environment. It's the invisible mechanism that makes your preference for, say, abstract art over flashy sports cars feel perfectly natural and innate, when really it's a highly calculated output of your exact social position. It's the translation layer between the specific capital you hold and the way you instinctively perceive, judge, and react to the world around you.
Now, I want you to just pause and really reflect on that for a second. Up to this point, we've mapped the volume of your power and the structure of your power. But the social space isn't static. It's not a still photograph, it's a moving film. So what happens to our understanding of someone's social position when we suddenly inject the dimension of time?
This is where we hit dimension 3, trajectory. Honestly, this is the most frequently forgotten dimension of the entire social matrix. A snapshot of your bank balance or your college degree is entirely meaningless if we don't know your vector. Is your capital evolving upward? Is it sliding downward? Or is it just remaining completely static over time? Your past momentum dictates your current posture. The underlying gnawing anxiety of a downward trajectory creates a completely different worldview than the breezy confidence of an upward one, even if at this exact isolated moment in time, both people hold the exact same amount of capital. Let's trace how this momentum builds across generations, because it's super revealing. The historical evolution of a family's assets creates a deeply subjective image of their position today. If Generation 1 was, say, a small shopkeeper, and Generation 2 was an educated clerk, and now Generation 3 is a private sector executive, well, that executive doesn't just feel wealthy. They feel a very specific generational momentum of modernizing upward mobility. Their habitus, their entire vibe, is shaped not just by where they are currently standing, but by the sheer distance their family has traveled to get there.
Conversely, consider the heavy burden of a downward trajectory. Bourdieu specifically highlighted a phenomenon that we are seeing everywhere today, the massive overproduction of academic qualifications, which inevitably leads to the devaluation of formal degrees. When a master's degree no longer guarantees the elite status it used to, individuals experience a terrifying downward pull. And to survive this, they have to take whatever social connections or sheer cultural know-how they have left and hustle into new, less traditional industries just to bypass their lack of high-value formal credentials. It's this frantic, urgent pivot, a reconversion of assets, just to avoid losing their hard-won place in the social space.
Okay, so how do we actually use all of this? Let's shift gears from heavy sociological theory into a highly actionable tactical toolkit. Because if society is, in reality, a 3D grid of constant, quiet struggle over capital, you need to know how to navigate it. You need to know how to brutally audit your own cultural capital and use it to your absolute advantage, especially when you step into rooms where the odds seem completely stacked against you.
Step 1. You have to master reading the dominant capital of the room you are entering. Every single environment has an invisible exchange rate. You need to walk in and silently ask yourself, is this boardroom or dinner party ruled by economic capital? If so, the winning posture is one of luxury, ease, and confident discretion. Or is this environment secretly ruled by cultural capital? Because if it is, the currency of the realm is esoteric knowledge, intellectual reflection, and a certain ascetic distance from commercial vulgarity. You literally cannot play the game if you don't know what currency the bank is accepting.
Step 2, assess your objective distance. This is absolutely crucial. If you try way too hard to match them, like imagine wearing a stiff, bespoke three-piece suit to a super casual, hyper-funded tech startup, you'll just seem desperately familiar. It's a classic, glaring tell of the anxious social climber. But if you pull away too much, you just seem arrogantly aloof. True practical mastery is knowing exactly how to dress, act, and speak to fit in, without ever losing your unique leverage. It's an unconscious, split-second calculation of exactly how much to lean in, based directly on the specific capital you hold.
And finally, step 3, deploy capital mismatches. This is the social jujitsu. Once you know the room's currency, use your unique assets to completely shift the rules of engagement.
If the room is just overflowing with raw money, but you lack funds, deploy deep esoteric cultural mastery to establish an alternative form of dominance. If you lack the elite formal degrees in an academic or corporate space, lean heavily on your powerful social connections and unshakable quiet confidence. You have to play the exact capital they aren't expecting.
As Bourdieu so brilliantly noted, the exchange rate of the different kinds of capital is one of the fundamental stakes in the struggles between class fractions. Think about that. The polite networking events, the breezy dinner conversations, the passionate debates over what actually constitutes good taste, underneath it all, it is nothing more than a constant, quiet struggle over which specific type of capital is currently the most valuable.
And through it all, as you navigate this grid, I want you to remember this central law of Bourdieu's map. True distinction is ostentatious discretion. It's exactly what we so often call stealth wealth today. Genuine, unquestionable social power never, ever overdoes it. Overdoing it instantly betrays insecurity. The most powerful positions in the social space rely on a very quiet, purely objective mechanism of distinction to signal their status. It is ultimately the supreme privilege of not having to worry about proving your distinction because your deep-seated habitus does all the heavy lifting for you.
So, we've mapped the volume, we've mapped the structure, and we've mapped the trajectory. We have moved so far beyond that simple, misleading income illusion. And so I will leave you with this final thought to ponder. If you were to completely stop looking at your bank account today and instead look deeply, honestly at the balance of your economic, cultural, and social assets, what is the true trajectory of your capital structure? Are you actually where you thought you were in the hidden social hierarchy? Take these coordinates, audit your capital, and start navigating the social space with your eyes wide open.